And Sean says, I think sometimes the hardest thing for me with programming is trusting the layering. It's hard sometimes to always be training weaknesses as it feels like you're constantly sucking and what were once strengths now feel difficult. How do you program for different times of the year and bring it all together later on? All right, so I'm gonna simplify and rephrase this question slightly if that's okay, Sean. And I think what you're asking is, will I lose my strengths by constantly working on my weaknesses? Let me first talk about this idea of layering that Sean has brought up here. And this comes back to my philosophies on periodization. So a traditional periodization model, which I believe is faulty and broken, basically proposes that you spend early season working on improving absolute strength, then you start to go more towards speed and power development, then maybe you start to build in localized muscular stamina, and finally build cardiorespiratory endurance on top of this. Now, for a general population, a well-balanced population who doesn't have any distinct strengths and weaknesses, I think this system works fine. But to be honest, how many people are general population balanced without any strengths and weaknesses? There is a lot of variation between the things they're good at and the things they're bad at. So like I said, I believe this model is faulty. And my proposal is that a model of periodization should be based on the individual. Now, what this looks like is early in the season, an individual will spend a lot of time working on their major weaknesses. Then as they get towards mid-season, they'll still continue work on the major weaknesses, but will also now start to introduce some of their more minor weaknesses. Then as the season progresses, they layer more strengths on top of that until they get to where they're looking to peak, where they have then more balanced programming. Now, this is important because you are only as proficient, at least in the sport of CrossFit and a sport where the generalist is going to be rewarded, you're only as proficient or as fit as you are competent in your weakest link. So we actually came up with a concept, the range of motion model of health, which is a model that I put together just over a decade ago to allow us to be able to treat people with chronic disease or injury right through to top level world champions, elite sports people, while fitting under this same umbrella. Basically, the concept looks like this. If you picture a wagon wheel with a whole bunch of spokes on that wagon wheel, each of these spokes represents a different component of your health, a different component of your fitness. And theoretically, we could have an almost infinite number of spokes on this wagon wheel. So maybe you have a spoke for strength, a spoke for power, a spoke for cardiorespiratory endurance. From a health metric point of view, spokes for bone mineral density or resting blood glucose levels or body fat percentage, spokes for mental health. And the more spokes we have on this wagon wheel, the more complete a picture of your health we can start to create. So we can assign a score subjectively to each of these spokes on the wagon wheel, whether it's a healthy measure, a measure of high performance, or whether it's a more unhealthy measure. Now, from a more health point of view, if you have a low measure on one of these spokes, that is something that's going to either, in best case, try and reduce your quality of life, or in worst case, cause premature death and disability. From a fitness point of view, measures that are low are going to mean you don't kick the winning goal, you don't qualify for the final, or you don't win the Olympic gold medal. So, different stakes depending on the sort of individual that we're talking about. But the common theme here is that you are limited by your weakest spoke. So again, if we go back to the wagon wheel analogy, if you have a broken spoke on the wagon wheel, as that wheel turns, eventually it will reach the broken spoke and the wheel will stop turning. It doesn't matter how strong those other spokes of the wheel are. If you have a single area which is letting you down, that is going to cause a problem, be it premature death or disability or an impairment in your performance. So this is my philosophy on why we should be able to balance your programming, because you are only as strong, only as proficient as your weakest link, as your weakest spoke. So how do we actually apply this model to programming? Well, we can apply this by understanding the concept that if you want to get good at something, you have to do more of that thing. And there's nothing groundbreaking there. But if we can systemize the prescription and the percentage of bias towards certain areas, then we can take what is a conceptual model and turn it into a practical application. So let's really simplify this. Let's say that fitness is comprised of just 4 different areas: of your absolute strength, so powerlifting, of your speed and power with a barbell, so your Olympic weightlifting, of body weight in gymnastic movements, and of your work capacity. Now, of course, we could have a lot more areas and a lot of subcategories within each of these, but let's keep it simple. So if we have an athlete who is a strength dominant athlete, so this athlete is very strong, very good with the barbell, their work capacity is not very good at all, and their body weight movements are okay. So we can rank their proficiency in these 4 areas. So we can say initially that, let's say the area that they are weakest in is their work capacity, then their body weight, then their Olympic lifting, and then their powerlifting is their major strength. This is traditionally a heavier, stronger, bigger athlete. So for this athlete, we know that those spokes that are broken or that are threatening to break are those spokes more pertaining to their work capacity and their body weight ability. So we would bias their training towards this. And again, very simply, maybe we're spending 40% of our time working on their body weight strength and stamina, on their work capacity, 30% of their time working on the body weight strength and stamina, and then 20% on their Olympic lifting and 10% on their powerlifting. So you can see just a very simple overview of how understanding the balance and proficiencies of an athlete can start to relate that to how we're actually programming practically for them. Now, what this means is that you're spending more time at the things you're bad at, strengthening these broken spokes. The aim here is not to neglect your strengths. In fact, we would want your strengths still to keep increasing. Maybe you're improving your strengths by 5%. So in the example of this athlete, their power lifts are going to improve by 5%. Maybe their Olympic lifts improve by 10, their body weight by 15, and their work capacity by 20%. So it's not that we are neglecting any strengths or areas of strength here. Everything is still being improved. We're just improving some things by more than others. So again, if we picture that wagon wheel, what we're looking at doing is bringing the strengths of the spokes closer together. As we start to layer strengths on top of your weaknesses, we're able to strengthen or fix the broken spokes, bring your competencies closer together, create an evenness through those spokes, and then increase the strength of all of them at a whole. So it's not that we get worse at our strengths using this system, it's just that we don't increase them by as much as we improve our weaknesses. Now, in this question, Sean, you mentioned that it's hard training things that you constantly suck at. Now, it's human nature to not like things that we're not good at. As soon as we get through a certain point in the school system, we get to choose what we want to specialize in. We then finish school, we go into a job that we are good at, or we go into tertiary education in something that interests us that we are good at. So we're engineered and molded and shaped to work towards things that we are good at. Now, when you're in a profession or in a sport or in a form of exercise where you're punished for having weaknesses, we have to flip this on its head. Because we're so used to doing things we're good at, we enjoy them, we do more of them, we get better, which means we enjoy them, so we do more of them and we get better, and you get this cycle going round and round. The problem with things that we are bad at is that we're bad at them, so we avoid them because we don't enjoy them, so then we get worse at them, and again this cycle goes round and round. So what we need to be able to do is break that cycle and take this weakness cycle and superimpose it over a strength cycle. And the way it works is like this: you're bad at something, you stick with the program, you stick with the methodology, and you work on it. Because you're working on it, you start to become better. You get some positive motivation because you see the improvements. Once you start to see these improvements, it encourages you to keep doing that thing. Therefore, you get better. Therefore, you start to enjoy it. Therefore, you do it more. Therefore, you get better. And again, we've now shifted this negative feedback loop into a positive feedback loop. And you're now starting to improve on something and actually enjoy something which was originally a weakness. So yes, you have to wade through this struggle phase, just like a flow state. If you want to get into a psychological flow state, there has to be some phase of struggle first. You have to wade through the mud before you get to this ideal performance state in the zone, in the flow. Exactly the same thing on a more macro level with trying to improve your performance. You have to wade through this point where you're not enjoying it, where it's tough, where it's hard, but then as you start to improve, this starts to become a positive feedback loop. In terms of how we are going to layer this to peak for a certain time of the year, we've talked about this concept of starting with major weaknesses and building strengths on top of that. we can actually get a bit of almost cramming of cardiorespiratory endurance. So if we look at the strength losses and gains in cardiorespiratory endurance, gains and losses as we go on holiday or stop exercise or have a break, we'll see that you can actually maintain your strength for up to 4 to 6 weeks. So you can stop training and you will hold on to that strength for a long time. But the research in cardiorespiratory endurance shows that we can start to lose our aerobic capacity in as little as 3 days. So aerobic tends to be easy come, easy go, whereas strength, you have to work harder for it, but it does hang around for longer. So if we are limiting the improvements in your aerobic energy system or any system involving cardiorespiratory endurance, we can get it back much more easily. So this is where we can say, yes, let's cram some of these elements of cardiorespiratory endurance, work to train that anaerobic threshold later in the season, knowing that, yes, it's easy to lose, but therefore it's easy, or at least easier to gain. Now, of course, don't make the mistake of doing all strength work early in the season, because that falls back on that old, more traditional faulty periodization model. That's not going to work because it does take time to develop that aerobic base. But it is easier to push it up or to drop it down by 5% as you need to. Not so easy to make those very short-term adjustments to strength work. Sean, I hope that answered your question, went into some depth on that and some tangents, but I hope that gives you an idea of why this layering and this new model of periodization perhaps is a good idea.